One. There we go. Hello. How are you
Hello.
doing? So welcome to episode 14
I guess.
of Drum Education Live. That's as far as we know. And we've got the amazing Toni Canelli with us today. How you doing, Toni?
I'm absolutely fine, thanks.
Good stuff. So I know I'm most familiar with Toni's sort of teaching work on Facebook. I watch his videos regularly, and I know about his work with the Drummers Alliance. But you had quite a long career before that as a player. So
Yeah.
I thought maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about how you started, kind of your most memorable gigs, and just whatever you want to talk about, and then we'll ask you some questions.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I started, believe it or not, my mum was a tap dancer, and she used to give me tap lessons when I was 2. So
Wow.
at the age of 2, she kind of sussed out that I had rhythm. So, but I wasn't really into having tap dancing lessons. I just wasn't that way inclined. So what I did, she bought me a pair of drumsticks and she signed me up for a marching band when I was about 7 years old. So I joined the marching band and learned how to do 5-stroke rolls and paradiddles and all that kind of business. And it became a bit of an obsession with me. So I don't quite remember this, but my parents told me I used to take the snare drum home and I used to put a towel on top of it, and I used to practice doing 5-stroke rolls and 7-stroke rolls so I could do them faster than the guys in the band who were about 19, 20 years old.
Wow.
Now, I'd not been an egotist. It was just, like I say, it was obsession. And eventually, I became the lead drummer in the marching band when I was about 9.
Wow.
And then I started to win awards for being a snare drummer. I won best drummer we went up to Scotland and did a competition, and I was best drummer of the day, which I've still got the medal for. We did the Royal Albert Hall, we did the Royal Festival Hall, we went to Germany, France. So as a kid, snare drumming to me was an obsession. But while I was doing that, I got a drum kit, and then that became an obsession as well. So I was lucky enough to be able to start playing the drums with a rudimentary background. So when I got the kit, it was just a case of like trying to fathom out the coordination of like playing beats. And then I just got besotted with Buddy Rich, basically.
Yeah.
So Buddy Rich, from that point, my parents took me to see him when I was 10. And believe it or not, that was in 1967.
Wow.
And evidently, after I saw that gig, they couldn't get me to go to sleep because my mind was, seriously, it did my head in. So that became an obsession as well. So I started to play along with the Buddy Rich big band stuff when I was about 10. But also I liked all the American R&B stuff. So I was heavily into James Brown, and I loved everything, the Motown stuff. So consequently, I started to join bands and I started to play in clubs when I was round about 11 years old.
Wow.
So when I was 11, I said to my mum, I love this and I want to do it when I leave school. So I was actually thinking about leaving school when I was 11. So we sought out the best drum teacher in London, and that was Bob Armstrong. I don't know if you've heard of Bob Armstrong.
Yeah.
Well, if I name some of his students, Steve Wyatt, Colin Walway, Russell Gilbrook, Pete Riley, who does the Rhythm magazine, we all studied with Bob. Now, the interesting thing about Bob was I said to my mum, not interested in learning the drums from a teacher. I want to learn the drums from a player. Now, Bob was a sensational session drummer. So when I went along to his lessons, it wasn't a case of just opening up a book and doing page 10. He'd bring me the music he'd been reading in the West End the night before, and he'd put it on the stand and he'd count me in and say, go. Now, Bob was a tremendous teacher, but he didn't stand for people not putting the work in. So if I went along to the lesson and I'd not prepared and I'd not practiced, I'd know all about it. but it was exactly what I needed. And so at that point, I was studying with a professional drummer, and I was getting to the point where I was upping my game all the time, because even if I could nail the piece with Bob, he wouldn't compliment me on it. So it just made me want to get better and better and better. So after I was studying with Bob, I started to play with lots of bands in London, and then things started to take off from there, because I was playing with bands playing at Ronnie Scott's, that famous jazz club, and consequently, because I was so young, I was only 14, I found a job with a band where they were all around about 30-year-olds. And I became this kind of novelty, because they were doing gigs, 3 gigs a week, with this child on the drums. So it was great for me, because, you know, personally, playing with older people really ups your game, because they were better than me. And because they were better than me, again, it was like studying with Bob. It was intimidation. And intimidation is good. You need intimidation in your life, because if you haven't got intimidation, you become blasé. So as a 14-year-old, I was traveling up to the West End of London every weekend and gigging. So I was doing Friday, Saturday and Sunday. I was the richest kid at school. Seriously. I mean, back in those days, I'm talking a long time ago, people would got, I don't know, £1 a week for pocket money. And I'm not going to say how much I was earning, but it was crazy. I was buying pasty 2002 crashes.
Wow.
So consequently, because of that, being young, getting experience, and when I was studying with Bob, he said, you need to, my weak point was my reading, and I couldn't really read. I'd learned everything by ear. So basically, my parents very reluctantly took me along to a social club in Romford, where they had a drummer and an organist, and they asked if I could sit behind a drummer and look at the music. So he very reluctantly allowed me to do that. And then little by little, I started to do songs. He'd invite me up, do a song, and because I was only 14, they would clap. And then eventually I started to do his gig for him. So the big one for me was, he rung me up and he said, I can't make it this weekend. Now, weekends in social clubs is a big time. He said, can you do my gig? And I was shaking in my shoes, because it wasn't just a case of like going along and subbing. I was actually having to do his gig. And I remember this distinctly, because this is in London, Romford. And I remember the act they had for this Saturday night was from Rotherham in South Yorkshire. Ironically, I live in Sheffield now, so I live with Yorkshire people. Now, I didn't understand a word she was saying. And basically, she turned up, and she's, as a singer, with all the music, she's given the music to the keyboard player, and then she had the drum music, and she said, where's the drummer, love? And he said, sorry, where's drummist? I want to see drummist. And I'm thinking, I don't understand what she's talking about. And then eventually he pointed at me and she said, oh no, I don't work with children. I was like, oh my God, you don't work with children. Thank you very much for that. And he said, well, I'm sorry, love, that's all we've got. So she gave me the music and she said to me, and I can remember these words to this very day. She said, if you mess this up, I have 4 kids at home that I have to feed, and I make my living from singing. So if you mess this up, my children won't eat. And I was like, what? So I nervously took all the drum charts into the toilet and just sat looking for repeat marks, DS's, coders. And I went out and I was so nervous. I can't explain how nervous I was. And I managed to pull it off. So at the end of the night, she came up and she said, you did it. I was like, yeah. And she gave me a hug. She said, do you know what, son? You've got a future. And that experience to me was mind-bending. So as a 14-year-old, I all of a sudden, I wasn't really taking school that serious. I was going to school, but I knew that I wasn't going to sort of just leave school and do what everyone else did, because I was studying with Bob Armstrong. I was getting notoriety as a drummer, and my reading was together. So after that, at the age of, I think I was 17, I played with loads and loads of bands up until that point, all around London. I joined a singing duo called Mac and Katie Kassoon, and they had some #1 songs in the charts, and they were on top of the pops. So that was my first experience of doing a proper tour, and that was an incredible experience for me, because up until that point, I could do all the Billy Cobham stuff, and then I was told to not do the Billy Cobham stuff, and I was told to just play a nice 1 and 3 on the bass drum, 2 and 4 on the snare drum, and make people dance. And that was a wake-up call, because I'd gone from doing clubs where there was maybe 400 people at a push to doing 2,000 seaters. So it was kind of like, for me, it was growing up. So I had to put behind me all my Buddy Rich chops, or my all my Billy Cobham stuff. I had to put all that in a suitcase and just start to play music and work for an employer. Something I try and tell my students is that the golden rule of business, and this is an easy rule, is the customer is the boss. Now, people don't quite understand that. The customer is the boss, because every penny you'll ever make in your life is pleasing the customer. So as a musician, I've always had to have humble pie. And when I work for somebody, I have to find out what they want. It's not about me, it's about them. So once you start to supply what the boss wants, because the customer is the boss, then the work starts to come in thick and fast. So yeah, I remember one gig in particular. I was playing in Cork in Ireland, and when we got to the venue, there was all the media outside waiting for the stars of the show, not me, for the people who were singing. And one of them saw me, and they said, "How old are you, mate?" And I said, "Oh, 17. They said, "Well, you're very, very young to be doing a responsible job like this." I said, "All right, thanks." He said, "Well, we're going to be in the audience watching." So it kind of went to my head. I'm never going to forget this one. So that particular night, I knew they were in the audience. So what did I do? I pulled out some Billy Cobham stuff. Now, I thought I'd played really, really well, and I put some impressive fills in. And afterwards, I found myself in the manager's office getting a real rollicking. And it was, "Well, I'm sorry, son. Why did you play like that? Because that's not the way we rehearsed it, and that's not what we want." And that particular telling off, again, was a pivotal point in my career, because you start to realize it's not about you, it's about us. So as a drummer, what I try and do is just get people to, I know I'm like it now. I just play what the song requires, nothing more, nothing less. The minute I start to get clever with it, then I know I'm not playing drums for the music, I'm playing drums for myself.
But I think that
So,
now you have a reputation of being the drummer you are. So people go after you because they know you, they know your style, how you play. So now it's the other way around. People, in the beginning, you had to adapt yourself to get jobs. Now you get jobs because people know, "Oh, Toni plays like that. That's the kind of drummer I want," right?
yeah. Well, something I've learned is that, even if any of us, if we just play a simple beat, our DNA is in that beat. So when you play, sometimes you sort of think, "I hope people are going to realize this is me." And sometimes we inject things into the music to try and prove our presence, but we don't need to do that. So if I listen to John Bonham play a simple beat, I know it's John Bonham. It's no doubt about it. If I listen to Ringo play a simple beat, I know it's Ringo. It's in the DNA. They're not. So I think all of us, we don't have to worry about trying to prove anything. We just need to learn to be ourselves. So after I'd been doing the gig for quite some time, I did more professional gigs. And once you get into this professional drumming thing, you start to realize there's lots of work, because most people are doing 9-to-5 jobs. So when someone's going to go out on tour, they look for people that are available. So that's why a lot of drummers or musicians get professional gigs, for the fact that they're available. But there's plenty of great musicians out there that don't do it professionally because they've got a day job. So it's kind of a weird scenario. But basically, after I'd been doing it professionally, I joined an orchestra, and we were working out in the Middle East, doing lots of stuff out there. And they were all from Sheffield. So every time he came home, I used to have to go back to London and commute to Sheffield. So I bought a house in Sheffield because I love it up here, because I'm a keen cyclist and I like hills. So I settled in Sheffield, and basically, as soon as I bought a house in Sheffield, I started to do studio work. There was tons of studio work up here, and I was playing in loads and loads of bands, and I was requested by people to start teaching. So I started to realize I could actually live in a house, because up until that point, I'd lived on the road. So living on the road is like being a traveler. You don't have anywhere to live. So I actually bought a house, and it was a revelation to be able to come home and put the kettle on and be a professional drummer. So I couldn't believe, then I started to do gigs with people that I admired. Like there's a guitar player called Gary Boyle. Have you heard of Gary Boyle?
No.
Well, I used to play with a band called Soft Machine.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Soft? Yeah. And he had his own band called Isotope, and his normal drummer was Simon Phillips.
Yeah, well, that was not normal at all. But
yeah, so I auditioned for Gary, and then all of a sudden I'm doing gigs where, if you listen to Gary Boyle's albums, some of the best drum performances I've ever heard the Simon Phillips do are on those albums. So I'm having to play the Simon Phillips drum parts. But what was great about it was doing music that I actually listened to, because as a professional, I'd been doing music that I didn't particularly listen to, but it paid a wage. Now I was playing music that I listened to, like Mahavishnu and all that kind of stuff. And I had a house, and I didn't have to worry about going out on the road. So for me, it was a perfect scenario. And again, if any of your viewers have not checked it, Gary's got an album called Electric Glide, and on it there's a guitar player called Gary Moore. Yeah. Have you heard of Gary Moore?
Yeah.
And Simon Phillips on drums, and it's phenomenal stuff. So it was a real wake-up call. And while I was doing that, doing the studio work, a lot of the studios had drum machines, which really knocked me off, because I thought drum machine is putting us out of work. So I put together this thing called Drummers Alliance with a view to promote real drumming. So what we did, I managed to get companies on board, and we went out and did a nationwide competition all the way around the country for marching bands, percussionists and drummers. Now, if you look into the Drummers Alliance, some of the guys that won some of the competitions or didn't win the competitions are some of the great players. Have you heard of Steve Barney?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Steve was in one of the competitions. And then there was a kid I used to teach called Pete Ray Biggin. Yeah. Have you heard of Pete?
Yeah.
Now, Pete used to play with Amy Winehouse, Adele. At the moment, he's a drummer with Level 42.
Yeah.
Now, you should check Pete out. He's an absolute monster. He's a monster player. And again, that kind of gave him the impetus to go on and become a professional drummer, because that's the whole idea of Drummers Alliance, is to give people a little bit of I don't know, incentive to get better. So the Drummers Alliance thing, and at the same time I was doing, there was a company called Remo, and they had drum kits out at the time, and I'd become a demonstrator for them. And I did gigs with Dennis Chambers, Mike Mangini, blimey, Ricky Lawson. So I've got to say, out of those drummers, Ricky was my favourite player. And I did 2 weeks with Ricky, and he became a bit of a sort of brother. What a nice guy. And I don't know if you've checked out Ricky's stuff, but he was a drummer for Michael Jackson. He played for Whitney Houston, Phil Collins. And sadly, Ricky's no longer with us, but he's a drummer that you might want to look at, because the guy had a groove to die for. And he totally played for the music, and that's why, I don't know, he's one of the most recorded drummers of all time.
Yeah, his group was, I don't know, crazy. It's like, so it makes you, it relaxes you, the way
Absolutely.
he plays.
What I found was, like, when I was doing the tour with him, I got to know him. When he was doing his demonstration, he used to just play songs like Billie Jean, very straight, no frills, nothing or whatever. And he used to play with another band called Steely Dan as well. And I remember on one sound check, we're halfway through the tour, and he said, "Come, let's have a drum off." I said, "Yeah, okay, we'll have a drum off." And I'm sort of thinking, this guy hasn't got any chops. Wow, he kicked my butt. He had all the chops you could dream of, but he just chose never to do it. Now, to me, that is a sign of a great musician. You know, it's not a case of like, you've got great chops, you need to show it. You don't. You just need to be able to make the artist feel comfortable. And that's why Ricky was such a great player. And again, Steely Dan, come on. I mean, Steely Dan used the who's who in drummers, and he was their drummer for years, but just because he just had the groove to die for. So, you know, that's my experience of like being a musician for many, many years. You know, a lot of people just sit and practice trying to do single strokes like Buddy Rich. My big thing is about trying to learn arrangements and learn dynamics, and just trying to play so the artist feels comfortable. And I think if you start to focus more on that rather than trying to prove a point, it's a much, much nicer experience, and you don't get told off so much.
Yeah, that's the best part. Kira.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a question. When you were drumming, I think you were saying you were like snare drum champion when you were, what, 9 or 10?
Yeah.
Were you self-taught up until that point?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, Mum was a tap dancer, and what she used to do, I can remember it now, she used to do a practice on the kitchen floor, and she could do the Buddy Rich stuff, like, you know, the solos, on snare solos with her feet.
What?
So, yeah, I know. So she used to do the tap stuff, and I used to hold the sticks and try and keep up with her. So she could do 5-stroke rolls, 7-stroke rolls, and you know, which was quite amazing, really. So she was a big influence on me, because if you watch someone like Sammy Davis Jr., he's incredible at tap dancing, but also he's an incredible drummer as well. Buddy Rich was a tap dancer, and so was Steve Gadd.
There you go.
They're all tap dancers.
Yeah.
So yeah, go on.
No, I also then wanted to ask you about touring.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy it, or do you prefer it now that, you know, you've got your home set up?
Yeah. To be quite honest with you, after about 5 years of touring, I just wanted to stop. I wasn't enjoying it, because when you're on tour, most of the time is sat around doing nothing. and then you just do a gig in the evening. If we were touring in Europe, I used to take my bike with me, my push bike, and I used to do sort of like 50 miles cycling, so I felt like I was on holiday.
Yeah.
But if we went to a country where they didn't allow that, you just sat in a hotel room watching telly in a different language, and it was just soul destroying.
Yeah.
So to be quite honest with you, I did touring for 12 years and I wouldn't go back to it. Sorry.
No, I think, don't be sorry. I think it's a valid point. You know, that's the thing. You've got to love it, I think. Otherwise,
I know
it's not working.
I know lots. I met a guy at the Manchester Drum Show a couple of years ago, who's the drummer for Slade. And do you remember Slade?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that guy he loves it.
Yeah.
And he's still out there now, even though he'd be about 70. Don Powell, his name is.
Yeah.
And he's still a road musician, and he absolutely and why not?
Yeah.
You know, if that's your mentality, good for you.
Felipe?
No, you now. I already interjected.
So, two questions, I guess. Firstly, about your cycling, because I've seen, like, following you on Facebook, I've seen sort of, I mean, the routes you go look amazing. But have you? I suppose, do you feel that has any impact on your playing or kind of your longevity as a player?
Definitely. There's no two ways about it. Cycling is about tempo. If you get into it, if you really get into it, I do time trials, and you have to set a tempo. Now that tempo is like setting a tempo on the drums. So what you have to do is you have to maintain that tempo in order to do a time trials at a certain speed. So that affects your heart rate and that affects your breathing, exactly like playing the drums. It's exactly the same. So cycling and drumming, believe it or not, are very similar.
Yeah, it's really cool. And with you still do quite a lot of recording work from what I've seen.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
So how's that changed over your career in terms of the equipment you're using, or how you're like?
Yeah, but believe it or not, when I first started to do recordings, it was what we call the red light fever.
Yeah.
I used to go into the studio and there'd be 5 other guys sat there very nervously, and the red light would go on, and then the tape reel would start turning, and you have to play, and you mustn't make any mistakes.
Yeah.
So that put me in good stead, because people that made the mistakes didn't get the recording work. Now you can go in and record, I don't know, 30 seconds and then go to Costa Coffee and come back and do another 30 seconds. It's a lot easier, but I'm not really a fan of that. Where I record at the moment, it's set up for analog recording. So we go in and we do the red light fever type recording, but it works really, really well. So I think don't get me wrong, I'm not being anti-technology, but I still prefer that way of recording, because I think the nerves actually draw a better performance out of you.
Yeah, true. Because if you can record just the bass drum and then just the snare drum and then
exactly, yeah. I find that really sterile, and I've done recordings like that. And to be quite honest with you, I can't bear to sit and listen to it. But if I do a recording where it's just me in the moment, I can bear to listen to that, because it's warts and all. But I don't want to hear me play perfect, because I don't think anybody can. Many years ago, when I was in Los Angeles, this is a good story. I bumped into Jeff Porcaro in a drum shop. Now, as you know, yeah, Jeff, woo. Now, what Jeff didn't know about recording is not worth knowing. And when I was talking to him, I said, I love this recording, I love that recording. And he kind of looks at me as though I was a bit crazy. He said, oh man, he said, they all suck. I said, what? Sorry, I've listened to it over and over and over. I can't find anything in your playing that sucks. So he was very, very hypercritical about his playing. I think that's what made him, I don't know. So, that's what makes him so special. Was every performance, he didn't think it was good, but to us lesser mortals, we're just in awe.
Oh, that's amazing that you bumped into him. Yeah, he's like the best
And
ever.
what a nice guy as well. I mean, really humble bloke. If I hadn't gone over and spoken to him, he would just have been quite happy to be by himself. Wow. I mean, that's one of the advantages of being 62, is I can go back that far.
I'm quite jealous you saw Buddy Rich, actually. He's one of the...
I saw Buddy about 4 times.
Wow.
First time when I was 10,
Yeah.
then a couple of times in between. And the last time I saw him was 1986 in Sheffield. And I think Buddy was round about 70 then. And I went along, because I'm a professional drummer, thinking, well, he might have impressed me when I was 10 or 15. He's not going to impress me now. Blimey, he blew me away. Seriously, it was unbelievable. At the age of 69, whatever it was, he could play the drums like a 15-year-old. And also the band, you could tell the band were nervous because he was such a perfectionist, and you could hear every note that was being played. And watching him up close, he could hear, like, if one of the trumpets was minutely out of sync, he would look at the guy while he was playing and kind of snarl at him.
Yeah.
You could see the fear on the trumpet player's face. But what I really admire about that is Buddy wasn't listening to himself at all. He was 100% aware of his musicians, and I think that's what all us drummers should do. If you start to become aware of your own playing, unfortunately, you're in danger of doing something out of context. But when you put 100% commitment into listening to the other players, you're always going to hold the whole thing together. So I got that from Buddy. Buddy never overplayed. If you listen to his playing, he was always on the arrangement. He never tried to feature himself, ever. He just made everything tight. And of course, give him a chance to do a solo, he'd bring the house down. But a lot of drummers used to pay money to go along and just to watch that. But personally, I wasn't there to watch the solos. I just liked the music, and I liked the authority that Buddy gave to the music that's made it sound so powerful. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Here, have you got more questions?
She has a whole list. She has like.
I know. I'm trying to say that without saying it. You know.
Yeah, I'm Brazilian. I can say whatever I want.
Do you still practice? And if so, what are you doing?
I practice all the time because, again, there's Jeff Porcaro just summed it up for me. You know, you're a work in progress. If you ever get to the point where you feel like you have arrived, it's the day you should just pack it in and become a milkman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't do it. So I love the idea of, like, there's an old Indian expression, no boundary, no burden. Boundaries are when you believe something to be true, or you believe something can't be, pushed. And that becomes a burden. There are no boundaries. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, the big thing for me is learning song arrangements. And as far as I know, there's God knows how many million songs. If you line up all the recorded music at the moment, it would take 600 years to listen to it all. So I am still a beginner. I don't know a fraction of the recorded music out there. So it's a case of, like, always feeling like a beginner makes you feel like you want to get better every day, gets you out of bed and makes you want to work at it.
Or makes you don't want to leave bed.
No, never. No. And like I say, when you speak to someone like Jeff Porcaro and you go back and listen to his recordings, he lived his whole life like that. of like feeling inferior. And my God, the guy he was a master.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's what I enjoy about doing drum clinics. I did another drum clinic with a guy called Greg Bissonette. Have you heard of Greg?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Greg is so humble. Woo. He's the most humble person I've ever met. And what a monster player. I mean, what an absolutely amazing player. So that's something else I've found by talking to other or working with other drummers. Most are incredibly humble.
I
That's
really
all I
want,
can say.
I really
Some
want
of
to ask
them,
about
not
the
so
ones you
much.
want, but I won't put you on the spot.
No, don't.
The
Did you
dirt.
say?
Yeah, he still needs to work.
I said I wanted to ask about the ones who aren't humble, but I don't.
No, don't ask that.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't get me into trouble.
We all need to work. Don't do that.
You can tell us after.
Yeah.
But I mean, what's nice about what we're doing today is again, it's like drummers are like a kind of I don't know, we're all drummers together and we like to talk. And that's what, when I was doing the Drummers Alliance competition thing, everyone watched everybody play and clapped them with total support because we love each other. You know, it's a fraternity. And that's what, but you don't find that with guitar players, I'm afraid.
No, you don't.
They all sit at home learning their licks and keep it to themselves. We go on open forums and share it. It's good stuff.
Oh yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You'd never get the Eddie Van Halen thing, you know, he turned his back on the audience so they couldn't see what he was doing. Drummers,
Exactly, yeah.
drummers just don't do that at all.
And that's another good story. Years ago, one of our guitar players had his amps made by a guy called Pete Hartley in Sheffield. And when we went a couple of times to the workshop, there's a guitar player called Alan Holdsworth. Have you heard of Alan Holdsworth?
Yeah.
Now, Alan, I know that Eddie Van Halen was a fan of Alan Holdsworth, and Alan was probably the most down-to-earth person I've ever met. You would never know it. He just liked drinking beer, having a laugh, but he just so happened to be a genius on guitar, which is quite an incredible thing to behold because, yeah, again, absolutely no ego whatsoever. But when you listen to what that guy could do on guitar, it's still unmatched. I've never heard anybody as good as that before.
So did you know Alan very well?
Well, the thing is, like, when I was younger, we went to see him play in a band called Tempest. Now, I don't know if they had a drummer called John Heisman. Have you heard of John Heisman?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we went along and watched him. I think it was at the Dagenham Roundhouse. I was about 15 or 16 years old. And my friend, believe it or not, was a violin player. And I don't even know, but Alan was amazing on violin.
Oh, really?
And at the Tempest gig, he did a lot of violin playing. And we went back to talk to him because this violin guy was a big fan. And Alan was as nice as pie. And then all the way through my career, when I was playing with Gary Boyle, again, who used Simon Phillips on drums, we went, Gary obviously knew Alan, because Alan's from, where's he from? Bradford. He's a Yorkshire lad. And Gary lives up in Yorkshire now. So there's a big Yorkshire music scene and everyone seems to know each other. And that's what I like about Yorkshire. I mean, I've been living up here now. God, how old's my oldest daughter? She's 26. So I must have been up here for about 40 years. No, 35 years.
Wow.
But I love it. I mean, don't get me wrong, because it had that kind of villagey feel and everyone speaks to each other. When I go down to London, even now, it just seems so big. It's so sprawling. I can't get my head around it. But don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't like London, but it's just vast.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you live in Sheffield, it's like living in a village.
It is odd when you come out of London and go up north and people talk to you on the street. You can spot the Londoners because they're all a bit freaked out because people are saying hello.
I remember when I was doing gigs earlier on, because I'm a keen cyclist, I used to live in a place called Upminster, and I used to, believe it or not, cycle to the West End, which must be 25 miles.
Yeah.
I'd do the gig and then cycle home.
Huh.
But, back in those days, the traffic wasn't so severe. we're talking 70s.
Yeah.
Now, I think, well, I don't know, after this coronavirus business, the roads are empty, but if it goes back to full capacity, I think London's still quite difficult to cycle around.
Well, the streets are pretty busy,
Yeah.
even though here in London, even though they think it's lockdown, but it's not.
No. Has it gone back to like full traffic where you are, Felipe? Because it pretty much has around here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
completely. Yeah,
We got a month's grace where it was quiet, and then
exactly. Yeah,
it's back on the road.
just back to normal now.
Yeah, I think it will all go back to normal. I mean, hopefully this virus business will just disappear, but who knows? But it's been tough on our business.
Yeah.
But I'm a firm believer that the tide always returns. So it's just a case of like, you just have to be positive about it, and eventually things will go back to normal.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. Do you of course, not now during the pandemic, but do you have like regular live work, or is more sessions and
No, what I do live gigs. Don't get me wrong, but believe it or not, I don't drive, and I know that's weird. So all the way through my career, I've relied on road crew moving the gear. Now I live in Sheffield. I've got so much teaching on, and I enjoy doing the studio stuff. Live gigs, I enjoy it now and again, but I'm not in any rush because, again, I did so many years of doing gig after gig after gig after gig. I must confess, I'm not a massive fan, but every now and again, yeah, I can deal with it.
Okay, cool.
So we got a couple of minutes left. Should we give the last question to Kira and a massive?
Yes.
No, don't give it to me.
She has the last question.
Yeah.
Make it a good one.
Choose carefully.
Okay, yeah. You're gonna have dinner with 3 drummers, alive or dead. Who are they?
Oh.
If I was going to have dinner with 3 drummers,
Yeah.
oh, well, obviously Buddy Rich would be top of the pile. Oh, blimey. Ian Pace from Deep Purple is one of my favourites, who sounds ironically a bit like Buddy Rich. And I think the other one would be, it'd be lovely to see Ricky Lawson again. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but I don't know, I love that guy. What a nice person. So yeah, they're my 3.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
Good choice.
Nice question, Kira.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for coming on, Tony.
No sweat.
Where can people find you online?
Just go on my website, www.tonicanelli.com.
Okay, and is the Drummers Alliance still going? Has that got a website?
Well, the last thing we did was, yeah, if you go on my website, it's all about Drummers Alliance on there. The last thing we did was a Pete Ray Biggin clinic, and that was going back a couple of years. But when this pandemic dies down, watch out, because we'll be back in business.
Cool. Excellent.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Right, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for being here.
Right, cheers. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Yeah.